Hello everyone and welcome to today's EMPA webinar. My name is Alison Martin and I am an EMPA Board Director. I'd like to honour and respect the land of the Kaurna people where I'm coming in from today, who are the First Nations custodians of the land where I am today. We acknowledge and recognise the significance of our shared history and we support the continued connections of First Nations people to country. If you could please acknowledge in the chat the First Nations people who are custodians of the land where you're joining from, and please also introduce yourself and your organisation. Today's topic is the power of collaboration, which aligns with the EMPA principle number 4, creating connections and integrating efforts. Our guests today are Shahana Data Textera from New South Wales Reconstruction Authority and Andrew Edmonds, ESM, from New South Wales State Emergency Services. Shahana is the Executive Director of Communications and Engagement for the New South Wales Reconstruction Authority. She has over 2 decades of experience, including stints as the Director of Media and PR for the University of Sydney, during which time the university was named the most prominent academic voice in the country during the COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to joining the university, Shahana was Lord Mayor Clover Moore's Chief of Staff and Deputy Chief of Staff and Communications Director for several ministers as part of the former New South Wales Labor state government, and also worked for local government in Western Sydney. Andrew is the Operations Media Manager at the New South Wales State Emergency Service, or SES. Andrew's team is responsible for delivering public information and operational media across the state. Andrew has a long career in various media, marketing, digital and social media roles, including with Surf Life Saving, the Australian Sports Commission and Defence Force Recruiting before joining New South Wales SES in 2022. Today we're looking at how these two agencies got together to avoid a repeat of the challenges that emerged from the 2022 floods that decimated so much of the Northern Rivers region of New South Wales. Cyclone Alfred in March was threatening large-scale flooding and then decided to dance around just out of reach of the coast, presenting a whole new set of communications challenges. Shahana and Andrew will take us through how everything unfolded from their end, and then we'll open up for questions. So please start to have a think of that as we go through. Over to you, Shahana and Andrew.
Thank you very much. Well, as we know, Tropical Cyclone Alfred was the first cyclone to have direct impacts to New South Wales in 30 years. And this presented unique challenges for communities on the ground and also New South Wales SES as an agency. It is a hazard that is not something that's commonly encountered in the Northern Rivers community, which meant that we had to be very agile as an agency and be ready to pivot, particularly around our trigger points for warnings, information and evacuations. That's because cyclone isn't like a usual flood or storm where we may normally see a severe weather event come up very quickly and cause consequences to the community. With Cyclone Alfred, we had to deal with 3 hazards in the one incident: damaging and powerful large surf, coastal erosion and damaging winds, as well as heavy rainfall and potential major flooding. So this presented a number of hazards that needed to be articulated to the community and a range of considerations for the New South Wales SES as an agency in terms of how and where we pre-positioned assets, how we informed our communities and helped keep both our people safe and the communities informed. And I might just quickly hand over to Shahana for her little open.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Alison. I think it's also important to note as a bit of a background that while the SES has a really long and proud history in the state, the New South Wales Reconstruction Authority is a very new agency. We're about 2.5 years old and established in response to those 2022 floods. So our role is to drive and support community-centred recovery and to lead the change required to reduce the impact of future disasters, and we do that through mitigation, adaptation and preparedness. So since we've been established, we've managed recovery for a number of smaller events, but I'd classify Alfred as the first real big test for the agency. also important to note that we're leading the largest home buyback and resilience initiative in Australia's history in the Northern Rivers, and that's through an $880 million program called the Resilient Homes Program, which is about getting people off dangerous floodplains. That program was established also after the 22 floods. So I think those are important points just to bear in mind when thinking about how both agencies approached the response to Alfred, because many people in the Northern Rivers still carry a lot of trauma from the 22 event and the government's response at the time. And I have to say that community sentiment to our work in the Northern Rivers is mixed. So we knew that there's history there, and we knew that we had a lot of work to do to build trust with the community, especially with what was shaping up to be a really big event.
We might just show you a little video showing you a bit about some of the consequences from Cyclone Alfred. So a key learning from the AFAC inquiry and also the 2022 flood inquiry was the need for combat agencies, particularly the New South Wales SES, to commence public information as early as possible in an incident. And to that end, New South Wales SES provided early information to the community well in advance of Cyclone Alfred. So around the 27th of February, I believe, was when we first started that communication to the Northern Rivers community, letting them know that New South Wales SES was monitoring Tropical Cyclone Alfred, which at that point in time was tracking down the Queensland coast. At that point in time, there was no real risk to New South Wales communities. The track at that early information had it indicating that it was moving towards Lord Howe Island. However, as a key learning from those earlier events, as soon as we had an inkling of a potential hazard, we started our preparations. We started readying our crews and making sure the community were aware that there was potentially a heightened hazard that they needed to pay attention to. We commenced early engagement with ABC Emergency and maintained daily contact. And as things got closer to Cyclone Alfred impacts been felt, the frequency of communications with ABC Emergency increased. We also started to position community liaison teams out in the field to make sure we were talking to residents, that they understood the potential hazards that they would be facing. We wanted to make sure the community had confidence in our capability to respond, and also to make sure that they were prepared and taking steps that they needed to do. As I mentioned at the top of the meeting, the cyclones are not something that the Northern Rivers community frequently deals with. In other jurisdictions such as Queensland and Western Australia, that hazard is much more well understood, and a lot of the buildings and infrastructure is designed and built to handle that. So a lot of our consideration and early messaging was around getting prepared and having a plan and knowing what you would do should the event of Cyclone Alfred moving closer to the coast. We made sure we continued to provide people transparent information about what the weather models were showing, what the likely consequences would be. And the good thing about this particular hazard was we had early warning and plenty of time to prepare. But that also presents a unique challenge, because we could also see with several days on end, particularly as Alfred crept closer and closer to the coast, its movement stalled. And that led us to the risk of message fatigue and people getting complacent and not really sure if the hazard was going to be as significant as earlier forecast. So that presented a unique challenge for us as a combat agency in terms of maintaining that communication with the local media, with our local stakeholders, government officials, and of course, local community groups. We needed to ensure that there wasn't that message fatigue, but also that critical information was getting through to those communities so that early preparation could be established. What we did to mitigate some of these challenges was set up a daily stakeholder meeting, particularly with local councils, elected officials, and various government departments. This daily brief provided us the opportunity to obviously pass on our current key messages to all of those stakeholders, and also, importantly, listen to the community, listen to the concerns from residents in the area, and allowed us to jump on top of any contentious issue as early as possible. So, for example, we heard reports of certain locations of being short of sandbags, or other locations needing greater community outreach, and we were able to deploy both resources and teams, and importantly, update our messaging to address any issues before they became significant. An important part of this was establishing, might just move on to the next slide, please. An important part of this was establishing a single source of truth. And that was via a landing page on the New South Wales SES website, which contained all information from functional areas, including sandbag locations, evacuation centres, transport updates, also information on school closures, where to get agricultural support, and of course the hazards near me, latest information and warnings, and what people needed to do. What this allowed us to do is effectively point every single stakeholder, whether they were a resident in certain streets in the communities, whether they were a state government stakeholder, whether they were a local council, to the single point of information. And that was the SES website, which we were able to update in real time with real information. And this allowed local councils to share and amplify our messages. It allowed other government agencies and departments the same ability. And as a result, we saw more than 500,000 hits in that 2-week period. And the Hazards Near Me app received more than 166,000 users, which was considerable uptake. As we moved into the Tropical Cyclone Alfred weather event, we got into a battle rhythm of sorts. We had consistent daily briefings at both a local, regional, and state level. These briefings were provided to the media via press conferences, live interviews, and obviously community meetings and updates. So it was a huge team effort across the whole SES and our partner agencies. We embedded ABC Emergency in the New South Wales State Emergency Operations Centre. And this became a pivotal decision because it allowed us to deliver accurate and timely information to communities. And as the incident unfolded, we did see widespread telecommunication outages, mobile phone losses, and obviously the loss of power. So ABC became a key partner, particularly after Cyclone Alfred had crossed the coast and considerable flooding had commenced. By having that consistent battle rhythm, it allowed all of us to plan our days. We knew what time we would be updating our warnings. We knew what time we would be providing our briefings to stakeholders. And the media also got into the same rhythm. So that made our days manageable. So we're not inundated with queries through all hours of the day. And it allowed us to have those recognised spokespersons and consistent spokespersons to deliver our safety messages. Next slide, please. In terms of reaching into local communities, it was really important we understood our audiences. We were dealing with a diverse community in terms of accessible people. We also had a traumatised community, and this is where the use of well-known locals and influencers, whether that's local politicians, local identities that can help reach into various community groups, particularly on social media. There's a number of robust local community groups using those influencers to help us amplify our messages was paramount. But the important framework underpinning all of this was consistent talking points, consistent messages, and a single source of truth where we could land people to. I might hand over quickly now to Shahana.
Thanks, Andrew. If we could move to the next slide, that would be great. So Sandra has said we were engaged really early on, both agencies, and the RA was directly involved in operational updates and those daily briefings as well. So we were also hearing what the issues on the ground were in the lead up to the event. The message that was shared from the Premier down at the time was that there would be no gap between response and recovery. So that was very much a focus for us. And it also meant that, our teams had to work really closely together. Early on, police, through the Public Informational Functional Area Coordinator, or PIFAC, took on the management of internal coordination of messaging about government actions, and our Premier's Department's Strategic Communications Unit used that to start rolling out consistent talking points and messaging to all impacted MPs, which was very important. So I'm co-chair of the government's Crisis Comms Committee, and it was clear early on that we'd need an all-of-government response to this event. And so with our other co-chair, who's the ED of Brand, Digital and Comms from DCS, we stood the committee up a few days before the event, and we set daily stand-ups in place with representatives from all New South Wales government agencies, and that also included the Cross-Border Commissioner's Office. So the daily catch-ups involved updates from Andrew and his team, from PIFAC, from the Premier's Department, from RA as well. And the aim was to really share updates, align messaging, and workshop any issues as a group. I'm sure you can all imagine that pulling all those agencies together and ensuring that everyone understood that the priority for government narrative at that time was about Alfred meant that we were able to reach a much bigger audience than if we were operating within our own channels. And it also meant that the government's voice was really clear and strong. And that was a point made by the Herald at the time. They ran an editorial about it, and one of the quotes was that the SES and government messaging was clear and consistent. So it's not usual you get that kind of feedback from the media, so I think worth pointing that out. As I've said, one of RA's key responsibilities is preparedness. And at the time, we were in market with a flood risk awareness survey in the Northern Rivers. So we quickly accessed what early results we could from that survey to really help us target our messaging and understand, where we needed to, what we needed to tell people. We found that over 50% of people in some really key areas were not aware of the new Australian Emergency Warning System, and that was a system that the SES was using to share information and updates. So it was clear that that needed to be a priority for messaging. Luckily, we'd recently run a campaign to raise awareness of the warning system through Get Ready New South Wales. And so we got that back up and running in those key locations and shared collateral on that campaign with key stakeholders. We also reran a campaign about emergency apps focusing on hazards near me as well. As Andrew has mentioned, making sure that local community stakeholders were informed and understood what we were doing was also important. And we established a local council comms group. And we sent them updates every day so they knew what was going on, and also shared all our messaging and collateral as well with them. We also did that with community groups and stakeholders, and our RA regional staff held a regular local community group online meeting. We had hundreds of people attending those, where we gave updates and heard about what the key issues were, and were, as Andrew said, able to really quickly solve issues through that forum. I think what also worked was having all the key agencies in the State Emergency Operations Centre every day, and having our Minister's office there as well. So again, we were able to quickly discuss issues, ensure alignment on messaging. We had a daily stand-up with our Minister's office as well as part of that. Knowing that the community were likely to be triggered by Alfred, one of the first posts that we did at RA social post was about mental health support and the resources that were available to help people. That post reached over 59,000 people and had I think over about 850 engagements on that alone. So feedback from the community was that they found that really reassuring and helpful. So we were able to set the tone early on for our comms. Next slide, please. So our comms plan for recovery was built on the work we did leading up to the event. And some of the tactics included organic and paid social posts. We had over 163 posts over the period, reaching over 400,000 people and with over 5,500 engagements. We ran daily media updates. We had a campaign that ran on radio and print, including Indigenous media. We had search engine marketing, posters, fact sheets, etc. And for the first time, we created a unique landing page on nsw.gov.au for recovery updates for people impacted by Alfred. So that included a live blog with daily updates from across government on things like road closures, school openings, public transport, health advice, cleanup support. It also included funding and grants information, with direct links so people could apply really easily for what they needed, and they were clear about what was available and who was eligible for that. We had lots of feedback from the community about how helpful they found having all that information in the one spot. In the end, I think the page had over 235 views over that period. And to give that some context, RA usually gets about 5,000 views a month. So that was a big spike for us. Next slide, please. We also worked with DCS to get EDMs out to the local community, both before and after Alfred, and stakeholder toolkits, which again included all our collateral so people could share that within their own networks. The EDM went to around just under 300,000 people, and the toolkit was sent to about 600. All had open rates of about 40 to 50%, so lots of interest. And those of you who work in recovery will know how hard it is to keep momentum up once the event has passed and the story moves off the front page of the paper. So while, after the event hit, while the general public moved on, we knew that the local community was still very much in the thick of it and, in fact, looking for support and attention. And so a key focus for us in RA was making sure that we kept that government lens and narrative on recovery for as long as possible. We did that through ensuring that the Crisis Comms Committee kept meeting. We had that running for a week after the event, and just making sure that we kept up with our comms and support during that time. Thanks, Alison. Over to you.
Fantastic, thank you. Some awesome highlights there, and I'm very interested in a couple of tactics that you used, especially. So I'll hand it over to questions now. I don't think we've got any left in the box at the moment, but please go through and ask as many questions as you like. One for me, the use of influencers is always an interesting conundrum, I guess, that I've had in the past. So I was just wondering how you, I understand sharing in community groups and if they share your message directly, but did you have any issues with them giving out kind of misinformation that wasn't quite right? And how did you tackle that?
So cutting through misinformation is absolutely critical, and it all comes down to collaboration and relationships. So you wouldn't just use any influencer, and it obviously depending on what you can get. But the advantage of an influencer in some small towns, for example, they're the credible mouthpiece. Everyone listens to Bob from the general store, or Peter from the fire brigade. People that are well known within their local communities can help in critical times sharing that information. And as long as we're providing them with accurate and timely information in a manner that they can digest and use, it could be as simple as visit the Has This Near Me app or check out the SES website for the latest information and where you need to get some information on what's happening at the moment. The important thing at all phases of the incident for us is what's happening, what the community need to do, and what we expect to happen next. And that was articulated at all phases of the incident.
Fantastic. How did you initially connect with some of those influencers and identify them?
So that's work that's undertaken locally by our New South Wales SES zones, and they've been working hand in hand with the Northern Rivers community since the devastating floods of 2022, and continuing to foster and build those local relationships. And it's something that has evolved and improved over time, but it's just something that every organisation needs to work on, maintaining those positive stakeholder relationships and continuing to engage.
And can you talk us through what the collaboration, I think you talked about regular meetings with the Crisis Communication Committee, but what was the kind of day-to-day collaboration looking like? Was it all through those meetings, or do you have other channels?
Yes, as I mentioned, we had a consistent sort of, let's call it a battle rhythm, so that we all had meetings at the same times each day. So it allows you to build and enhance your momentum throughout the incident. Really important to be strict on your battle rhythm, because otherwise time escapes you, it runs away from you. And as incidents unfold and situations escalate, if you're caught up in meetings all day, you don't have time to be doing the core tasks. And if I can also reiterate, it was a huge effort with a large number of communications professionals working at a local, regional and state level across all functional areas within the New South Wales State Emergency Operations Centre, and also at the New South Wales State SES Command Centre. So lots of regular briefings and collaboration, but a consistent plan, a single source of truth for the community on what the current situation is, what we need people to be doing, and what's going to happen next, laid the foundations for that collaboration.
Great. Sue has put a question in around asking about some more detail about how you managed the communication that was coming in from community members and how you filtered that or prioritised it or even verified that information.
Yeah, but that's a critical thing in terms of managing that misinformation, because sometimes the loudest voice isn't necessarily the most important voice. They're all important, but cutting through that misinformation is critical. And a key way that we did that was that daily stakeholder meetings that were held within the New South Wales SES and the local elected officials. So we were able to hear what they're hearing from the communities on the ground. Our community liaison teams that are out there chatting with locals, chatting with the targeted communities, whether they be Indigenous communities, whether they be persons with disability, getting all of that information coming back to that central point allowed us to, I guess, pivot as the incident changed and make sure all agencies were aware of whatever the sensitive issue of the day was. It could have been as simple as, the Tweed Council needing residents to boil water, or widespread power outages, which meant people needed to turn on ABC radio to listen to the updated information. Or it could have been these areas are now under evacuation and they need to move to evacuation centres. And I guess the thing is, you need to have that two-way ability to listen to what's happening from the ground and also push out information as to what we need people to do during the incident.
I think also important was that our RA regional staff who are based in the Northern Rivers had those established relationships with community groups and, had that trust built. And so we were able to really leverage of that. And as I said, we were sending daily updates. We held those regular online catch-ups. And what also was helpful was early on, the local superintendent, Scott Tanner from the Northern Rivers, was named the local recovery coordinator for the event. And so we're able to also use him to, quickly resolve issues that were coming up through those community groups.
Fantastic. So you mentioned that the Crisis Communications Committee met for an extra week, but did the communications go on longer, and how long is the recovery effort? Are you still going?
We are still going, and yes, the comms, everyone in recovery will know recovery is a long process. We are still doing things. We still got recovery going from 2022. So we made it. We made a real effort to work with the local media to continue those meetings with the community groups on a regular basis, and to make sure that we were still getting information out to people and letting them know what support was available and how they could access it for much longer than I think. We did it for. We're still doing it, really.
How receptive was the audience to government communications across all agencies based on their previous experience in 2022?
I think that there was a bit of concern ahead of the event, and also important to note that we just passed the 3-year anniversary of the 2020 floods when this happened as well. So there was a lot of emotion in the community, but I think that once they saw that the SES were out there every day, really early, providing updates. We had the Premier on the ground with the Minister, which was also incredibly helpful. I think that was also seen as very reassuring. And then, as I said, the clear and consistent messaging from the government, they knew that we were with them and we were supporting them. I think that really helped build that trust.
So at the beginning, you mentioned a quite staggering amount of warnings out in there, and using the use of the Australian warning system. Firstly, is there an understanding between awareness and understanding that you found through your campaign, and then also what else went with those warnings? Were there any kind of warning products as well?
In terms of the campaign, Shahana can probably talk about that, but there was, yes, there was many warning products. The warning footprint was essentially from Taree on the mid-north coast all the way through to the Queensland border. And there were warnings for, obviously, severe weather, coastal erosion, and, of course, moderate to major flooding across a lot of those areas. And the New South Wales SES actually issues our warnings at a local level. So there could have been several products within the same river catchment, for example, but depending on the timing and consequence and what's expected within those communities at that point in time. And then I might get Shahana to touch on the campaign.
Yeah, I think with the campaign, our focus was really on amplifying what the SES were doing and making sure that, you know, we were using all government channels to really get that message out there.
And still on the warnings, did you receive any feedback about the wording of the warnings or advice, or even the recovery message, and what worked best in the region, if you did?
Not really, no. But in terms of feedback of the wording of the warnings, they're pretty well set at, you know, advice, watch and act, and emergency, and their associated action statements that have been through rigorous amounts of research based on what people need to do, and it is a national framework across all agencies in terms of those action statements and also classifications. So the important thing for us was also having those localized warnings, but making sure there was that sort of central landing page on that SES website that brought all of that information together in a simple and concise method for media to understand what was going on, for our emergency broadcast partners to understand as well. And I guess the other consideration we had to balance was Queensland was also issuing warnings at the same time. And use of things like emergency alert is sometimes done different between state to state. So SES were using the emergency alert for that, you know, life-threatening critical emergency warning type products. And yeah, in terms of feedback from the campaign, I again would refer to Shahana on that one.
I think we knew that there was feedback about people finding it confusing to understand what support was available in terms of recovery, which was why we decided to create that landing page where all the information would be there in one spot, and to also really break down and make and have something in plain English that made really clear what support was available, who was eligible, and then how people could apply. So the feedback we received was that people found that actually really helpful. I think previously people would have to go through a survey and, you know, kind of go through a whole lot of different channels to understand what support was available. And as we all know, when people are in recovery, that's quite challenging.
As often is a concern for us when we have everything online and use a lot of power, mobile connectivity, etc. With the loss, it's always a big concern for community members. But how did you deal with this as agencies?
So, as I mentioned in the presentation, we had ABC Emergency embedded at the State Emergency Operations Centre in Homebush, which allowed us to deliver real-time information to both Queensland broadcasters and Northern New South Wales broadcasters. The tricky thing for some of our footprint, in the Tweed Heads, for example, most of those are broadcast out of Brisbane. So we had to, I guess, deconflict with what was happening in Queensland and time our messaging appropriately so that was cutting through to the local communities in Northern New South Wales. But having ABC Emergency engaged early allowed them to increase their resourcing. It allowed them to plan with their broadcasters in terms of where they might need to be cutting into, and having that 24-hour coverage alongside the SES allowed us to work hand in hand as information was needed to be pushed out to those communities. And it's really important that you don't forget those traditional channels, because as we saw, Facebook not available, internet's down. When you haven't got power for more than a week, you lose your telephone service. All they've got is that portable battery radio to keep up to date. So it's absolutely critical. Also, in the context of a cyclone, we might not necessarily have access and to be able to door knock people should there be trees down, flooded roads. So it was really critical that people didn't just rely on one source or one channel for their information, that we were sharing it across as many channels as we could with that consistent message and consistent call to action.
I think also, important to remember that fact sheets and flyers and posters and, that kind of hard copy collateral is still really important. And we actually made a point of sharing all that through all those networks so that they could disseminate it at a local level, but also had it up on our resource hub on our Get Ready New South Wales website so people could download it and have a look at it that way as well.
Great. And was part of that sharing that information beforehand?
Yep.
So what role do, and I'm not sure of this acronym, hoping you'll know, the NFP neighbourhood centres play in communications?
Wondering if it means not-for-profit, maybe?
I'm not sure of that acronym either, unfortunately. So sorry, Alison. What was it? NFP?
Neighbourhood centres. I might get Shari to clarify that in the questions, please. And then we'll go on to another question. Now that, the use of influencers, different community groups, are there any plans to utilise those with some training or anything like that before the next disaster?
It's a very good idea. As I mentioned, the zones do manage those local relationships and are often engaged, but that's certainly a valuable activity. So we can again have that consistent source of truth, that consistent information, and obviously learn from the things that worked well in this incident and try and replicate them into the future.
And thanks, Shari. Confirmed, yes, not for profit. So not for profit neighbourhood centres, were they utilised at all?
Absolutely. They were part of our community briefings. We shared our collateral with them. We made sure that they had information about what activities were underway, what was coming up, and what talked to them about issues that they were hearing on the ground.
And we've talked a bit about the ABC. Does New South Wales have any other emergency broadcasting partners? And did you come across any issues having a media organisation stationed in operational rooms?
So we don't have formal agreements with other broadcasters. However, we do have key relationships with all media, and we're involved with regular briefings with commercial radio, commercial television, and of course community radio as well. So let's not forget the local independent stations. A lot of the advantages of commercial radio is your messages can be syndicated to a wide audience quite quickly, and that's similar with the ABC. In terms of ABC, I believe, and Shahana will have to confirm because I wasn't at the State Emergency Operations Centre, but I think they were not in the operational room per se, but they were just within the State Emergency Operations Centre.
In the media rooms, yep.
And we've got a comment from Adam. So he said at Transport for New South Wales, we were working with TMR colleagues to align transport-related messages where we could, especially around road closure information for freight operators. We also leveraged channels where possible. And I know, Andrew, you spoke about some of the cross-border challenges with warning messages and alert, different ways of doing emergency alerts. Were there any other challenges in that cross-border space or opportunities potentially?
There's definitely opportunities. I think the main thing was Queensland, I guess the difference is the Queensland side of the border saw more significant impacts, but there was still very much a real risk that it could have proceeded further south, and we saw greater consequences in New South Wales. The thing with a large event, the metro media all head up to wherever this large event is, but some of the challenges we do see in smaller weather events in the Northern Rivers is Sydney metro media largely, it's in Lismore, it's a long way away. They're not overly interested until it's a really significant event. And the other challenge is the Queensland media, they're obviously focused on their audiences and their communities. So it's really important to foster those local relationships with those local stakeholders, because until it becomes, a really critical or significant event, your media cut through is rather limited. So
I think as well, in terms of recovery, making sure that people, on those border towns understood what support was available was also really important. And we worked really closely with the Cross-Border Commissioner's Office to make sure that, they had access to all our collateral, to Queensland collateral, so that we were able to share information and not have that gap.
Great, and that was talking to not just ABC, that was all kind of local radio, any local media outlets. Excellent. And so finally, what was the duration of the event incident for response, and when did recovery initially stand up? I think it was reasonably early, but how long were you operational for? Noting that recovery is, of course, still operational.
So New South Wales SES commenced operations on the 26th of February with that preparation messaging. And I don't have the exact dates in front of me, but I believe Alfred crossed the coast around the 2nd or 3rd of March. And Shahana, when did we hand over to you guys? It was about a week later, maybe?
Yeah, it was a few days later. But as I said, we were involved really early on as well. Obviously not with messaging during response. That was what SES were doing, but we were making sure that we were ready for recovery, and also getting messaging out about recovery very early, so that people knew what to expect. As I said, a clear point from the Premier was that he didn't want a gap between response and recovery communications. So we worked really hard to make sure that happened.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. I really enjoyed hearing about the response, recovery, planning, and how everything was achieved. So well done to both of you and your organisations in what was a very difficult and unknown time. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. There won't be a webinar in June, because we hope to all see you at the conference in Melbourne from June 4 to 6th. You can still register on the website at www.empa.org.au. But on the first Thursday in July, we'll have another Cyclone Alfred themed panel. I think this storm might be a bit of a gift for EMPA, and just keeps on giving. So that one will be with Alice Atkins from NEMA, who will lead a discussion on the communications around uncertainty and what Australia has learned from that storm. So we hope you've all signed off from disaster season so far. I don't know that I should really say that, and get a bit of a break, but we really hope to see you at the conference. Thanks, everyone.